Recording. There it is. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I am just so thrilled to see everyone kind of showing up in force for us. I can't express my excitement and my gratitude to all of you for joining us. For those of you who do not know who I am beyond my emails in your inbox, my name is Erin. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Relational Organizing Coordinator here at the Massachusetts Democratic Party. So a little bit about me, if you don't know me already, I joined the state party a little over a year ago as Special Elections Coordinator. And after those elections wrapped up, my wonderful bosses kept me around as an elections coordinator. I got to work with a bunch of in-state down ballot races, as well as running our out-of-state program. And then, right after the November election, I had the incredible opportunity to be deployed to Georgia and work full-time with their voter protection team. So what I learned from my time in Georgia was that, with a little extra time and a little extra intention, you can make every program personal. You can prioritize relationship building. And I learned that not only is this approach possible, but it's worth the extra effort every single time. So those were the things that I wanted to carry on when I returned back at MassDems, hence the title Relational Organizing Coordinator. I'm all about relationship building. As you can see in the chat here, we're one big family. We've all heard the tried and true saying, all politics is personal. But tonight, our wonderful trainer is going to talk exactly about what that means. Before I pass the mic over, I want to talk a little bit about Blueprint to 22, which is why we're all here tonight. So for those of you who found your way here in ways other than, hearing it straight from my mouth or from our website, you may be surprised to learn that this session is just one piece of a larger 16-month program. This night and this program have been months in the making, as the whole staff here has really looked deeply at ways that we could collaborate with our partners, support on the ground year-round organizing, and share our resources and in a way that benefits Democrats statewide. So at its core, Blueprint to 22 is the foundation of the 2022 coordinated campaign. Over the next 16 months, we'll begin building and supporting the coalition that will set us up to win locally in 2021, take back the corner office in 2022, and make real lasting contributions to our communities. The way we view it, we have 5 quarters between now and the 2022 general election. And each quarter will provide organizers a blueprint for relational organizing outreach to expand our networks and really meaningfully engage with our communities. Monthly training sessions, just like the one we're all on right now, will supplement each quarter, helping organizers build and expand their personal volunteer network. The goal of Blueprint to 22 is not, to complete tasks or make endless calls. It's truly to build relationships and skills that last through 2022 and beyond. So I'll drop the website in the chat so you all can check it out and learn more about the ways to get involved with our program after this training. But to get down to business and the reason that you're all here, I am so honored and so thrilled to be introducing our trainer for tonight and my dear, dear friend, Kristen Elechko. Kristen and I met when she served as Ed Markey's Deputy Relational Organizing Director, and she has been such an asset and a partner in developing this program. She is actually the person who first opened my eyes to relational organizing, and for that, I am forever grateful. Her organizing history in the state of Massachusetts is deep and rich, and anyone who has had the opportunity to work with her can tell you how incredibly uplifting and supportive she is to partner with on any sort of organizing initiative. I'm just so happy to have her here tonight, and I cannot wait to share her wealth of knowledge with all of you. So if you have any questions throughout, please throw them in the chat and we'll be sure to touch on them at the end of the training. But with that, I'll pass it over to Kristen. I'll share my screen so we can have some visual aids and we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Erin. I hope you can all hear me. Maybe somebody could wave at me. Erin, can you hear me okay? Awesome, thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for such a warm welcome. I've really enjoyed spending so much time with you as you've been preparing Blueprint for 2022. I also just want to say special thanks to everyone at the party for really believing in the transformational work that we're, I think, all about to embark on. It is not that we have, relational organizing is nothing new. I actually share often with people that it's something that we're very familiar with instinctually, and we often do very naturally and normally. But what my understanding of relational organizing has come to be after working with at least 10 down ballot races between the primary and the general last year, another 10 out of state, and then just the history that I bring in terms of the organizing and electoral organizing that I've done before. We all, again, have this very natural way of coming to this work, but when we can put some best practices into place and I think give each other ideas, we all, as I've been sharing with Erin, I think grow the ability and possibilities of what relational organizing can be. I also want to share my perspective often comes from relational organizing being less technical and more personal. So it really is about the human to human process. There are many campaigns who have built really remarkable apps. They are absolutely amazing. They also just do not take the place of, I think, the person-to-person contact that this has so much power around. So I think that's just a bit of the theory that I come from. I really got passionate about relational organizing in a very different way, again, in this last cycle, when I first started seeing some statistics around, and we'll go into this a little bit later in the hour, some statistics around the number of people who really get left behind, and the number of people who are choosing to vote only in certain elections, and how much my belief is that if we engage with them from a personal level, they A, don't get left behind, and B, hopefully have more reason to really engage in the electoral process. I think the other thing that you'll hear me repeat is that what I believe about relational organizing, it is not solely about electoral organizing. It's actually about civic engagement and then just really building, I think, communities, building relationships again in our communities in ways that I think are meaningful and helpful. I think before I go on, I just want to also say that I won't be able to see the chat while I'm kind of running through things on a basic level here. I'll be able to check in at certain points, but I know Erin's going to pay attention to the questions as we go along, and we can take some towards the end. So what is relational organizing and why do we want to do it? You know, we oftentimes come to this work together around turning out the vote and engaging people around specific candidates. But what I really believe is that if we're talking to the people who are in our communities in different ways, that it can be less divisive, more inclusive, and incredibly empowering to come from this specific lens. Erin, maybe you want to go to the next slide, which I believe shows statistically. So this slide comes from the Analyst Institute. It's come fourth or fifth hand to me, so I apologize for the quality, and oftentimes try to make sure that I source what I'm showing people, but I don't have access to that capability. And still, I think the thing that I want to point out here is that, you know, we're also familiar with text banking now. We're also familiar with phone banking, writing postcards, all of the ways in which we engage people around electoral politics. And the thing that continually shows itself is that relational organizing has the ability to engage more people at a higher rate. Here it says a 2.8% higher rate than other styles. I've heard statistics upwards of you can reach people at like an 86 to 87% rate. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Like when you call someone who has their phone, your phone number in their phone, they're more likely to answer your call. They're more likely to call you back. Same with texting or reaching out in any sort of style or way. And so that's the reason why I think there's like so much ability and so much power, and not only like the way in which we engage with people because it is so personal, but also the return and the ways in which we can really build power in the long term. So Erin, maybe you want to go to the video. Do you have the link for that? Thank you. While Erin's working on that, I can just share that that a team that I was working on previously put together both just like the visual aspects, but the very simple broken down ways in which we can all relationally organize with each other. So this is like the very simple overview in a way that can be, I think, digested.
Electing leaders who reflect voter values and fight for the issues and policies that matter to them is crucial. Why? According to the United States Elections Project, in the 2016 presidential election, around 138 million Americans voted. That's only about that matter to them is crucial. Why? According to the United States Elections Project, in the 2016 presidential election, around 138 million Americans voted. That's only about 58% of those who are registered. While it is only one issue, according to the Environmentalist Voter Project, in 2016, over 10 million environmentalists skipped the presidential election. If politicians want to win elections, they will focus on the issues of voters, not non-voters. The less you vote, the less likely you are to be the focus of candidate and issue-based education. So why does relational organizing matter? Think about the issues you care about. Maybe it's gun control, maybe it's climate change, maybe it's abortion, maybe it's healthcare. Relational organizing brings those issues back to the forefront. It's one method to make it easier to talk about politics, and it has the potential to make a difference on the local, state, and national levels. Most of us are familiar with making phone calls for candidates and now even text messaging. But who answers the phone when you call? The people you know. Relational organizing is the most effective way to turn out voters. It has higher contact rates. You know the people and you understand what issues matter most to them. You know how to reach them best and what directly impacts them. So how do you do it? Start off by setting aside some time to make a list of the people in your community, your network, and your organizations. Consider your friends from high school and college, your holiday card list, your book club members, parents from your kids' school, friends who forget to vote or complain a lot about politics, etc. Think about what they care about and why. Reach out, make contact with them in the method that's most natural to your relationship. Maybe it's writing them a letter, maybe it's calling them on the phone or sending them a text, maybe it's sliding into their DMs. Make it personal. Don't worry if you haven't spoken to someone in a really long time, that can actually be the fun of it. If you care deeply about a candidate or an issue and you think they do too, it's a good reason to reach out. Capture your conversation and share it with a campaign. Follow up. Again, the most important part of the process is making sure that your connections vote. Vote by mail is safe. Learn your local and state guidelines and deadlines. Participate in early voting or show up at the polls on election day. Set measurable goals for yourself. Contact a voter a day until the election. Commit to helping a minimum of 20 people make their voting plan. And share these tools and resources. This year, more than ever, the most important thing any of us can do is to help each other make a plan to vote and then make sure we actually do vote. If you need more information about processes and deadlines, check out your local town or city website. They usually have some information there. You can also check out vote.org or iwillvote.com. And to sum it up, call your people, talk about what matters, make a plan to vote, and follow through. Thank you so much for tuning in. This video is done in collaboration with Team Markey. We hope you are able to talk to the people in your circle and make sure they get out and vote this election.
Thank you, Erin. And we're really happy to share the link for this video. It really was built and intended to be mostly open sourced. So if it's something that you want to use when you're working with smaller groups of people who you may take some of this information and knowledge and transfer along, please know that that really the intention was to have that be accessible to everyone and anyone. And so I just want to reiterate again where we left off. I mean, really, relational organizing is the most effective method to connect with voters and make it and makes it a valuable option for broadening engagement. You know, traditionally, when campaigns build their universes and build the lists through which we make calls and texts and write postcards, those voters have a very specific voting history in past elections. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, there were some specific statistics that I had heard that really just like shocked me and had me thinking about how we can each individually, personally engage in the connections that we already have to shift that. So the first one that I heard was that 20 million environmentalists are registered to vote. Yet in 2012, only 4.2 million of them voted. And my mind was just blown by that. When I think about all of the things that might be the reasons as to why, and I think about the ways in which we connect with people, it doesn't necessarily have to be environmentalists. It can be any sort of issue-based aspect of the way that we engage, that this matters. That really shook me. And similarly, in the same article, they actually were talking about Massachusetts in the 2014 gubernatorial election. Keeping with environmentalists, there are almost, in the 2014 election, were almost 300,000 environmentalist voters that skipped the 2014 Massachusetts gubernatorial election, but that election was only decided by 40,000 votes. So when I think about the people who we're connected with in whatever way, shape, or form that we are, being able to engage them in this process can be really meaningful. Another example, and this goes back to expanding the universe that we call, you know, the way in which we build our lists and make the outreach to people. 4.4 million people who voted for Obama did not vote in 2016 and likely have not voted since 2012. So that means that they're likely not on anybody's list anymore, but still have a passion for being engaged in some way, shape, or form. They just didn't have a reason, or no one reached out to them. And so to me, the thing that I get really excited about is really bringing people in, making this big tent and making a difference. As we all know, we're leading up to 22. I mean, that's when I think about the amount of people that we can reach in the time period that we're talking about, not only just in the local elections coming up, but then building along and building beyond. I really believe we have the power to be able to change electoral politics through this process. So thank you for allowing me to be passionate with you as I'm doing it. The other thing that I want to know is that with relational organizing, we all have the ability to be able to reach out into the communities that we live in and work in, and engage not only the communities in the way that we know them, but also reach out to leaders of the community as well. So the vote and the planning and the process becomes so much more powerful because it's less about short-term electoral organizing and so much more about building the power of a community and being able to come together, not just for one moment in time, but for so much greater than that. And again, when we reach out to our people, they really have the ability to be able, we have the ability to be able to engage them much more quickly, easily than a call or a knock or a text or a piece of mail. And I think the thing that I want to add too is that remember, as you're sort of thinking about this process, these are your lists. These are the people who you connect with, and you'll be able to use them in so many different ways. I think often back to, I had done a presentation similar to this with the Climate Action Now group. And as we were doing the planning process, they were confused about how they might do relational organizing within their group. And they then went on to say, we have a list that has X amount of people on it, but generally we have 25 people who come to a presentation. And my offer to them was, if you already have that community of people, you know that it's a certain amount of people, that's a great group to just solely focus on and engage. You're already coming together and around an issue that you feel so passionately about, and so why not connect with them and make sure that those are the people that you really turn out to vote as well. And I believe strongly that this is how we win the corner office and every office down to the school committee and even, you know, beyond. So again, thank you for letting me get excited about it. I think the other thing to know too, and this is something that Erin and I have talked a lot about, is that this past year with COVID has really changed how community organization and information is connected. And with things like mutual aid and people really making sure that they are caring so deeply for their neighbors and the way that we're sharing information, that isn't necessarily an electoral benefit, but it does mean that our communities are being knit together in different ways. And again, I think if we are connecting with people from a different mindset in terms of community and civic engagement through the ways in which we all have been shifted through COVID, that there's just so much value to it. Erin, am I forgetting anything there in terms of some of the things that you and I have talked about?
No, I think that's perfect. And it just reminds me that we saw a lot of changes come out of 2020. And some of those, you know, should stay. You know, we were creative and we felt a higher sense of community. And just because we did things differently doesn't mean that everything has to kind of go back to the norm. I think we can learn lessons from 2020 and continue them to have really successful elections through 2022 and beyond.
I agree. And I think what I'll follow up there, and I said this earlier, is that I really learned something new with every team that I've done this work with every, you know, campaign that I've worked with. We've thought about something different. We've thought of a different way that we can potentially engage. We've broadened the ideas of what's possible. And so I think that's something that I feel strongly about, is that this is not about something that is like step 1, step 2, step 3. It's about what you bring as a person, as a human, to the process that's so important. I'll take a moment to also say that there are definitely times when many of us feel uncomfortable about talking about politics. And to me, what is so great about relational organizing is I think that it breaks down what can oftentimes be contentious and divisive conversations, and can really allow us to learn how to meet people where they're at and connect with them in a way that will then bring them along to a candidate or even to the party. I think, you know, with so many people who are undecided and not registered with a party, their vote is incredibly important. And I think one that we have the ability to earn through this type of process, where we talk about a candidate or we talk about an issue that a candidate represents in a way that really allows us to be able to connect in a different way than even just simply, you know, will you vote? And even just simply text 3 of your friends and make sure that they vote. This can get much more involved, but I think in a much more natural way from my experience. The other thing that I'll say is that the most important thing, and I'll underline this again, the most important thing that you can ever do when it comes to relational organizing is to capture the information of the conversations that you have and loop them back to whichever campaign it is that you're supporting. That data makes such a difference in terms of the planning of any program that Field can run, really being able to not only, again, expand the universe, but also it saves the time and energy and effort of a campaign, knowing that that you've already captured the information and support of a candidate. I will also say that, you know, if someone says, I don't support your candidate, that's also incredibly valuable information for us to have data-wise. So don't feel as though you've done something incorrectly or that it's not helpful when, you know, you might have someone who's saying flat out, like, I just don't support it. Every bit of information is incredibly helpful. And Erin, I saw you flew by the slide, Senator Reverend Warnock's quote. This really hit me recently. It's something that I think a lot about, and most of the time I've been thinking about how every vote counts. But I think that in the times that we are living in, with democracy being as fragile as it is, really thinking about the sacredness of the vote and what that means. And I think instilling that in the conversations that we have with people is really, really important and really, really helpful. And there's a different type of intentionality, right? Like, it's not just about counting people, it's about really meeting them where they're at and having them feel empowered in, again, like expanding the electorate. So thank you for going back. I oftentimes have people sort of ask me, so how can I build the list of people that I do relational organizing with? What kind of network ideas do you have and connections do you have? They're sort of beyond the people that I talk to about politics already. And to me, I always think that the lists are endless. But to just give you some ideas around thinking outside the box, I have a whole big list here. So if people really want a bigger list, I can always offer it. But, I think about, like, if you, gratefully now that we are having the ability to be outside and be around each other more, like thinking about hosting a summer barbecue, who would you invite? Or if you can think about family members who may not vote, I think about new voters who may either be registered because they are not registered because they have just recently moved to town, but younger people who are just growing up. I think, who would you ask to find a good doctor? Who would you want to see a movie with? What email lists are you on? I think that's a really, really, really big one in terms of making connections with people that can really expand beyond those who we just typically do the work with. And I think we can go on to the next slide, Erin. So social media, okay, great, thank you. Relational tools. So I love being able to personally build any tools that help us to capture the information around the conversations that we've been having. I think they're also really great ways to reach out to people and have them engage on their own. One that I really appreciate and think has been incredibly useful on a number of occasions that I've used is using Google Forms, because people can opt in to answering the questions that you might have in terms of engagement, but that form also then takes the sort of processing in the back end and captures the data with any information that you might have in the form, which makes it then easier to sort of plug that back into the campaign. I think, I've built some informational guides. I think the way in which any of you might want to express this within the communities and the groups that you do your electoral work in, your civic engagement, your mutual aid work in is really valuable and helpful. And so I think being intentional in the way that we do the work in that sense is super helpful. And then if you want to go to the social media slide, Erin. As we all know, we don't just have the phone numbers or emails or mailing addresses of all of the people that we live in this very interconnected world with now. And so one of the things that I have also found to be incredibly useful is how we use social media to do some of this engagement. Again, going back to the Google Forms, I mean, a Google form is something very easy to drop into a Facebook post. It's something very easy to text, email, that kind of thing. But what I've found most useful has been when we really person-to-person engage with people, not necessarily in a blast, but directly speaking to them, oftentimes through either direct messages or messaging or whatever it might be, depending upon the platform that you tend to use, is the most valuable. If you use Instagram, another place that I've seen some value and has been really helpful is setting up polls to engage people around whether they're interested and what they might be interested in doing. And again, there's plenty of times and ways that we can, I think, get more specific in engaging and supporting people around this work. But I think it's a really great place to go and look and see who might be beyond our natural 2 or 3 or 5 that we tend to do the work with. And I'm just looking at my notes here to see. there's one story I think that I'll share before maybe we go to some Q&A. I'm thinking again about the expanding the electorate and how we can do some of this relational work. I shared the story about Climate Action Now earlier. Relating to social media, I worked with someone in this last cycle who was actually, she was very strategically thoughtful in the way that she was using dating apps, and actually used a 1 through 5 method to see if the people who were matching with her were interested in the candidate that she was supporting. And while she was not intending to make a match with anybody and was really using the platform, she has in fact found someone that she has been dating since. So you never know what you might possibly run into as you're doing some of this work. And then I think one other story that I want to share is the Shrewsbury Dems. I'm not sure if there's anyone who's on this call from that group, really thoughtfully and strategically did some postcarding last year where they pulled all new voters from the town and wrote postcards. And to me, I think that's like another example of utilizing a list in a really thoughtful way and making personal outreach to voters to encourage them. That's I think innovative and new. And there's just so many ideas like this that have come forth with people who I've been doing this work with. So I'm sure each of you are going to be brewing with your own as well. So I feel good if we want to go to questions. Erin, I don't know if you've been capturing anything, if there's been anything in the chat so far, if we want to, how we want to open it up. But I feel like this is a really like engaged style of work, and so it's slightly awkward to talk as much as I did about it without connecting with each of you. So thank you for listening to me, but I'm excited to make it more dynamic.
Yeah, Kristen, let me start with what's in the chat. And so we have a question from Melissa, who says that most people that she knows in Massachusetts are through the Democratic town committee or politics, and her social media is also a pretty blue bubble. And so she's wondering how she can still help.
I mean, I think if that's the case, maybe the way that you can be supportive is to find those within that same community who don't reflect the same community as you do. So what I mean by that is, if you feel like you're pretty oversaturated, maybe those who you're working with don't feel the same way. And so expanding the reach by you taking some of this knowledge and sharing it with them, then they can sort of pass it along, if that makes sense.
And that's actually a perfect segue to another question that immediately followed it. Nick Herter said that his question is kind of on the opposite side of the coin. What recommendations would you have for building connections somewhere where there might not be huge Democratic connections or an established base of Democratic voters?
Yeah, I mean, the place that I most naturally go is like most of us have human connection in some way, shape, or form. So whether it's, I mean, it's funny that I'm about to say this because we've just lived through COVID, but whether it's like the barista that you order a drink from, or, the person who's bagging your groceries or whatever it might be, I think we all engage with people in some way, shape, or form. And I actually think this is an important thing to say. So I call myself a recovering introvert. Like, I'm not someone who like naturally just talks to people on the street and while I'm like going about doing my business. And in fact, because so much of my work is electoral politics, when I'm out in the world, I tend to be more quiet. But I have also learned how to, I think, like just naturally engage with people around the process. And I think this is when it comes down to, or one way to bridge this is that each of us does have some sort of passion or care around issues, right? So like, maybe an example of this is just recently I was connecting with someone who really like talks about how much they hate politics, but they work in the music industry. And the music industry has just been so challenged by COVID. A lot of the smaller theaters have been really struggling. And because they work in the music industry, they also naturally just have like a very large network of people that they engage with, just not around this thing, right? But I think being able to think about like, okay, so they care about music, they care about the issue of saving the stages was essentially the work that we were talking about. And naturally, all of a sudden, we had like a larger group of people to make some of these connections with, and talk about the ways in which the people who we elect matter in supporting our everyday lives in ways that we oftentimes don't think about. So I think that there are some ways that we can really connect with people that they're more natural in our lives if we take the lens of electoral politics off.
And there are a few other questions, but I just want to jump to Celia Nolan's question real quick because I think it's along the same vein. And she asks, for people who aren't usually involved with political conversations with their friends, how would you bring up the subject after maybe reaching out? You haven't spoken to this person in a few months, and then you're reaching out. Hi, how are you? It's been so long. Hit them with electoral politics. And I would actually jump in here real quick. To answer that question and what Kristen was just saying, I think that we have such an incredible opportunity right now, being in a quote, off season, being between big statewide or national elections, to talk about the things that might be more accessible, to talk about the issues that, exactly like Kristen's example just now, matter directly to that person or matter locally, walkable streets, bikeable streets, local public education, talking about what matters to the people directly, I think is always an intro. And once you build that relationship, it makes it so much easier to come back in 16 months and say, all of these shared values that we have can now be put to practice in an electoral way. But Kristen, if you have any more to add on that, I think that's often something that a lot of people ask in relational. How do I even broach this subject?
Sure. And to me, I think it's exactly what you just described. And the real intention around this is, of course, it's to get people out to vote, and of course it's to build some process around that, but really it's about making our communities stronger and our relationships stronger. And we've just become so disconnected in so many different ways, that this, I think, really is intended to be so much more longer term than, yes, in this moment, in this room, we are all talking about 22. That is important to us. That's why we showed up. But again, as Erin said, we have this length of time to be able to start make the connections, to build the list of people who, when we do come to needing to ask for their vote and get out their vote, we've already organized ourselves in ways that will then show power at the end. And so this is, I think, it's just less traditional than we're used to thinking about it. And I think it takes some time to really get to know. And this is why it's so much easier to kind of work one-on-one or in smaller groups, to be able to really kind of like see, so what is it that you individually need? What is it that your community needs in terms to really turn this into electoral power? And I've offered this to Erin and so many. I mean, I'm always happy to be a sort of coach and support in any ways, shapes, or form, that if you're sort of wondering more outside of this larger group, I'm really happy to connect. And there's a number of people who I have seen saying hello on this that have worked alongside me in so many different ways, including Erin. But aside from Erin, there are others here who maybe I've indoctrinated. So I'm not the only expert in the room.
So John Mahoney has a few good questions that I also might take a quick stab at. So he asked first, how do you loop the data back to a campaign? And then also asking, what if he knows people outside of a committee? Can he somehow relate them back to their Democratic town committees? And I just want to say that, Kristen, maybe you can talk about how you did this on Team Markey, but it's going to be different based on which organization or campaign you're working on. I would say just really pay attention to the ways that they're collecting the data. And the beautiful thing is that the larger piece of the program that I've been alluding to all night, we've really broken down this process. And so in being involved in the actual blueprint program, you'll know exactly how to collect that data, exactly how to get it back to us. You'll get reports of who you're talking to every month. And so we've really solidified that process on our end. But I know, just as a broad stroke, it's going to be different based on the different campaigns. And maybe, Kristen, if you want to talk about how you all went about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's looked different with each campaign that I've worked with, which I shared before. you know, the thing that I care deeply about is lowering the technological bar. So like I've had people who literally have like written down on pieces of paper and somehow gotten that to me, like who they've talked to and the contact information and where that person sits and whatever it is that we're speaking with them around. To again, the Google Forms I think are really easy, even if it's just for yourself and you don't share it. It's a quick and simple way for you to input the data. But again, Aaron and we've worked pretty closely on both taking some of the rudimentary ways in which we can capture information. And I think Aaron's done a really great job of building assets that are tools that will really help, I think, utilize that in powerful and supportive ways. And it's a good check-in too. So there's doesn't always need to be an app, I think is the main thing.
And then this is a similar question from my good friend Jim Better from Somerville. How might a local city or town committee organize around relational organizing? Would we develop, a way to track who's taking personal responsibility for specific voters in town? Would they track that in Vote Builder or some other way? So kind of similar, and I think I have my own thoughts on this, but if you want to hop in.
Why don't you start and then I'll add in too.
So I was actually reminded of it by a question by John Mahoney that's also in the chat, which asks, how is postcarding relational? And so my interpretation of relational organizing, and we've talked about this so much, Kristen, is that relational organizing doesn't have to be just calling your friends. It can be really integrated into every layer of organizing and traditional organizing approaches. And what relational organizing to me is just the prioritization of that relationship building. So for postcarding, I think about the fact that instead of just handing out a postcarding list at random to your city or town committee, breaking that list down by precinct, having folks only postcard in their precinct and leave room and autonomy and creativity to leave a little note about what matters in that very specific community. You could do the same thing with phone banking. You could do the same thing with canvassing, canvassing your neighbors. And I don't know if Jason Palich is on this call, but I'm going to put him on the spot because he ran an incredible program recently where instead of handing out door knocking packets at random, folks were assigned 50 or so doors to knock and followed those people all the way through election day and returned to those people. And that sort of relationship building, it really takes these traditional tactics and applies that layer of personalization, which I think is so effective. So I guess for Jim's question, it would be specific to what the initiative is or what the program is. But I think that the overarching theme is that it doesn't have to be a side program within your campaign or your initiative. It can be integrated into every level of organizing, which is pretty exciting when you think about it.
I know, and I think the things that I'll add there, and thank you, Erin, I think those were great examples. I mean, one, I think I've really noticed how little we organize amongst ourselves. So like, if I think about a city or a town committee, people are oftentimes signed up, but may not necessarily be engaged. And so I think connecting with those people first and foremost, because at some point they came through the door, they may have moved. And that again is, I think, like valuable information in terms of being able to clean up lists and collecting data. You're reminding me, I had the opportunity to work with Julie Oliver's team in Texas in the general this last go around. And I had a number of young organizers who were really passionate about climate change. And we were offering them lists of people who were traditional voters. And naturally, they didn't know a lot of them because they're in a 16 to 25 year age group. And traditional voters, as we were giving them, were people who were even like older than some of their parents. And so they got really innovative. And back to your sort of like, door knocking idea, they were going to go out and just do lit drops. And what they did instead was, because they knew the people in their neighborhoods, and because lists don't necessarily include people who might be likely voters, they knew the people who lived in these houses. They made sure to not skip a place, or if some, if they knew the people who lived in the house, they knocked on the door. If they saw, naturally there might be like lawn signs or bumper stickers on cars that can help you sort of get a sense of the people who live in a home, knocking on their door and also engaging with them. And they walked away in a single weekend with 696 more people that we had no idea even like existed, because they weren't in our systems in any way, shape, or form. And that just like completely blew me away in terms of what our ability is, again, going back to expanding the electorate. And if you think about going back to the beginning of this presentation, if the 2014 gubernatorial was decided by under 40,000 votes, like imagine in this next 18 months, if it's that, we have some time, I think, to really start to connect with people in really meaningful ways that, again, go beyond that specific election. So I'm not sure if that really all answered specifically the original question, but I do think they're helpful examples.
So I'm going to hop to Rachel's question, which I think is really imperative when we're talking about any sort of organizing. And it's that even on this training tonight, there's a lot of similarities in the people joining, a lot of similarities in skin tone, and not as much diversity I think we'd all like to see across the board. And so how have you in the past, and how do we start finding and listening to the communities that we want to join our 10 and we really want a part of this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's been my experience that there in every community is leadership or network or connection that just naturally exists. And I think really trying to not transactionally, but transformationally, try to learn who engages within their community is the right, best way to connect with them and share with them, I think, the tools that we're talking about and the knowledge that we're talking about today. I think that's what's so great about the shareable video and the way that that was built. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be about the candidate. It can be just about sharing with people the ways in which they can think about how to expand the connections that they have or plug in the connections that they have, and really mobilize them in a direction. Likely, I mean, community leaders are doing, this again goes back to COVID, like the amount of ways that people who really rise up and lead within their neighborhood or whatever it might be has been so tremendous. And I think they're not hard to find when it comes to really, like, especially just not necessarily being white and homogenous, but broadening in so many different ways.
I think that's perfect. And I think that it's something that distributed organizing and relational organizing really embraces, right? We're all the best organizers in our communities. And when we embrace that and kind of leave out the exporting of leadership, we really give people the opportunity to rise up in leadership roles. And I think that the more diverse your leadership is, the more diverse every single layer is going to be underneath that. And so I think real dedication there is where the difference is made. So Leah has a question. And
I just jump in really quickly, and I want to just add something there that I'm remembering is that not to always bring it back to data, but when we're talking to the people who we are connected with already, they're more honest with us than someone might be in another way. And so I think that's another important reason why relational organizing and find community leaders who are working within their communities already in whatever way, shape, or form it is. Like, I just had a conversation with someone who had told me that another person, or I thought that they were a regular voter. And in fact, in talking to someone who they were more connected with, they were very clear with me that they don't vote at all. And so I think it's an example of the honesty in the conversation when we're really deeply connected with each other is incredibly important in this process for us, so that we know how to engage people and where to engage them.
So I'll ask this question from Leah, and then I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We're going to wrap up around 7. So if anyone wants to try and get their final questions in, I'll try and ask them, and we'll also save the chat. But Leah kind of touched on something we talked a little bit about earlier, but I think is really a point that a lot of people bring up in relational, which is, what if your town and city doesn't seem interested in politics or voting in general? And I think that same question could be applied to, what if your friends, what if your family doesn't seem interested in voting?
And I think I'll add in, what if there's, some divisiveness in the town, I think, or the city or whatever it might be. I just always do so naturally go back to there's generally some commonality around an issue that's specific to that place, whether it's streetlights or roads or schools. I mean, I think schools is a really big one. It might even just simply be sports. I think there's lots of ways that communities do naturally connect. And I understand, I'm thinking specifically about one campaign that I worked with in Massachusetts in this last cycle, that this was our experience. We just had a really, really, really hard time sort of like finding the people and the leaders and those who would even be brave enough to come forward. And I think while that feels very hard to start, it's to me the places that I think we have the most work to do. And I know that that doesn't sound exciting to people in the same way that it might to me. But I think it's really about, again, just like how do we build a long-term relationships with people from very human sort of perspectives and values, and learn from them as to what they do care about, and then find a way in our minds and the ways in which we connect with each other to share our perspective, I guess, around why this matters. And this being why leadership matters and how it affects our everyday lives. I mean, I think COVID again showed us that, like, leadership really mattered in the state.
And I would even add to that, that's something I used to talk about a lot when we were kind of in the heart and the heat of the pandemic, is that people were often afraid to ask even normal volunteers to engage with their campaign, thinking that there's so much going on in everyone's lives. And I would always say, don't always view it as that hard ask that we're all taught, but view it as an opportunity to give someone 2 hours of positivity in their lives. View it as an opportunity to give someone a chance to join our community and join the wonderful opportunity to make friendships like I've made, and the things that have really gotten me and a lot of other people through a really hard year. And so I think that when you enter a conversation with the mindset that you might be offering someone something that they don't even know that they need, it's a lot easier to have that conversation than always viewing it as asking someone to do something for you. And so we have just 3 more minutes left, and I want to really be mindful of everyone's time. I am just so grateful again, and I hope that you're all feeling as fired up as I am after listening to Kristen and just being invited into this space. And it really means the world to me that you all showed up in force to learn about creative and impactful and inclusive ways we can organize together. Of course, a huge thank you to our trainer, Kristen, tonight. I wouldn't be a very good organizer if I didn't take advantage of this moment and make my own ask of you all, or an invitation to join our program and our community. And so, as I mentioned at the start of the hour, this program is so much more than these incredible training sessions, which we'll be hosting monthly. But we're taking action too, and we're really going into our community and we're getting to know folks, and we need all of your involvement to make our statewide impacts. So please, we've dropped in the chat, we'll do it again. Visit massdems.org/blueprint or email blueprint@massdems.org to see how you can join the team and how you can be involved. Don't worry, no ask is complete without a follow-up. So I will be emailing all of you. I'll be digging through the chat and seeing some additional, I know there are some asks for statistics, and we'll drop the video. And so I'll make sure I follow up with everything that's been really meaningful here tonight, along with a recording to share with your friends. But I just, want to say thank you again. And I'm so excited to organize alongside all of you in the next 16 months. Kristen, if you want to say anything else, and then I think we can we'll hang on for a few minutes and then sign off.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say thank you all for your time and attention. And again, I really welcome any ongoing continued engagement, because it is sometimes a lot easier to work through some of these conversations and connections and questions in smaller groups. So I've shared with Erin that if any of you have ongoing ideas or thoughts, she has my contact information, and we can find ways with what you might have in mind to stay connected and really, I think, win back the corner office, but also build stronger communities in the Commonwealth.
Thank you, everyone. So we'll hang on for a little bit in case anyone wants to chat, but I'm going to stop the recording and let everyone enjoy their night.